Good evening, and if you're just tuning in, thank you so much. You are listening to the Angel Rock on UPRN Radio Network. I'm your host. Sorry, my brain's not working tonight. Trying to get in host mode now. I want to give a huge shout out to my friend Lois T. Martin and Joanna McNally, Garfield McNally. They just had me as a guest on their show, and I have a great guest for you guys. If you've never been to the show, by the way, I'm your host, Lorilei Potvin. Even though we're broadcasting live from New Orleans, Louisiana, I'm actually in Canada. I'm a psychic medium. I'm also a crystal Reiki energy healer, Akashic Records practitioner, spiritual teacher and mentor, as well as a nurse. And if you haven't been to the Angel Rock before, what my show is all about, as I say, I cover all aspects of the, I guess, even supernatural. I don't even like that word, but we cover anything from aliens to, the paranormal, to angels, the power of positive thinking, alternative healing methods, anything positive. And the guests that I have on my show, I feature when through the work that they've done, they're making a positive change to humanity, whether that is with the information they impart or even the work that they're doing. And tonight is no exception. I do want to remind you before I introduce him, we're not on our regular YouTube channel. YouTube gave us a slap on the wrist. So I think that one's down for about another 5 days. But I would love to invite you to come and join us over on our alternative channel, which is called the UFO Paranormal Radio channel, I believe. That's a name I wasn't looking right yet. I'll remind you when I get to that channel. Because when you're in the chat there, I'd like to involve you in part of the discussion. If you've got questions or comments. And so I'd love to see you there. We're also streaming live on Facebook, on the UPRN page, as well as News on the Flip Side, Joe Montaldo's page. And by the way, he is the owner of UPRN. He is also my producer and actually for all the shows. So I want to give him a huge shout out because he makes my job easy. I just get to sit and talk. We're also over on Twitch, and I believe we're even over on Parlor. So you can find us on lots of places to watch the show. So tonight is no exception with an amazing guest. I want to thank Gavin because he's from the Paranormal Chronicles. He's a good friend of mine. He's been on the show before, and he sent me this wonderful guest. His name is Paul Anthony Wallis. I'm going to read a little bit of his bio. He's a researcher, speaker, and author on of books on spirituality and mysticism. He researches the world's mythologies for how they speak to our origins as a species and our potential today as human beings. In the 80s and 90s, Paul's work centered on establishing foundations for new faith communities. Over the last 20 years, he has designed and delivered training for church ministers for the UK and Australia, where he is right now. He did tell me, though, he lived in Canada for a little while. We're going to talk about that. And he said in Australia, Paul has lectured on the history of religious thought and hermetics. Sorry, I think that's what it's supposed to say. You can correct me after, Paul. And then in brackets, it says principles of interpreting texts, including the Bible, and has served the Anglican Church as an archdeacon in the Australian Capital Territory. You also provide personal coaching to clients in leadership and a practitioner of healing in the Christian tradition. You're also a musician, storyteller, like I mentioned, an author, a mentor, a conscious breather, and a barefoot walker. And we're going to talk about his brand new book that's out. It's called Escaping Eden. Welcome, Paul. What an impressive bio.
Thanks, Lorilei. Thanks for having me on the Angel Rock.
I'm so glad to have you here. Wow, where do we start? Like I was saying quickly, you mentioned that you actually were living in Canada for a while.
Yeah, I grew up in the UK.
Mhm.
And then when I was in my mid-teens, my parents moved to Montreal
Wow.
in the province of Quebec, beautiful part of the world. And I sort of commuted between the UK and Canada for about a decade.
Mhm.
And then 21 years ago, I moved to Australia,
Mhm.
where I met my now wife, Ruth, and where we had our family. And so this has been home for 21 years and proud to be an Australian by choice.
Beautiful. I will be careful about what we say, but my empathies go out to you because we are very akin of what we're going through with the changes in the world right now. Very, very
Yes,
in both countries. So, and with
I
that, I
think so.
send out much love and healing to anybody that may be going through a difficult time right now because a lot of people are. So you've got a new book out there. It says Escaping from Eden. All my print on the banner, I had it covering up. So let's talk to people because this just came out, right?
Escaping from Eden came out about this time last year,
Oh,
and
I'm so sorry.
that's quite all right. And its sequel is coming out this month, The
That's
Scars of Eden.
okay. Sorry.
So Escaping from Eden, though, is still pretty new, and it's still charting. I check it every morning to see how it's going on Amazon, and it's selling like hotcakes at the moment. It's a really exciting title for people. It's a book I think you can give to anyone, Escaping from Eden, whether they've got a zero interest or a 10 out of 10 interest in the topics I'm talking about. It's aimed to take someone from zero to realizing there's something here serious worth looking at to do with the question of our origins and our place in the universe.
Okay, so when you say our origins, now I know, but for our listeners or watchers out there, when you say origins, what are you referring to?
Oh, well, we could talk at a couple of levels, but if we just think biologically, the subtitle of Escaping from Eden kind of gives it away. It says, does Genesis teach that the human race was created by God or engineered by ETs? And so right away, you know what the book's about. That's
Right.
the question it's addressing. And my way into this topic has been through the world of ministry. I was for 33 years in the world of Christian ministry as an archdeacon, which is a kind of a church doctor for many years in the Pentecostal churches and Anglican churches. I trained pastors in, it's actually hermeneutics, the
Thank you.
principles of interpreting ancient texts, although I like hermetics as well, also a fascinating topic. But it
Yes.
was interpreting ancient texts, particularly the Bible. And it was really through my work in that area that I began taking note of some anomalies in the stories we tell ourselves about human origins, anomalies in Genesis and in the pages of the Bible, but also anomalies in the mainstream scientific answers to who we are and where we all came from. And those anomalies had really been bothering me since I was about 11 years old,
Wow.
which is when my parents introduced me to the work of Eric von Daniken and Chariots of the Gods. And as an 11-year-old, I felt that he had correctly named a gap in our ability to explain ourselves as a species. How come we are the alpha species on planet Earth? I was going to a Church of England school as a young boy, and so if I listened to the religious answer to who we are, well, we're God's special creation. All right, so how come it's so obvious that we're animals? Can you talk me through that? And then the scientific answer would say, well, we're at the top of the tree because we have higher intelligence and higher consciousness. Okay, well, where did that come from? How did we get that? And there's a gap in our ability to explain that. And it's only because of our higher intelligence that we are the alpha animal here, because probably, Lorilei, if you or I were left out in the wild for 3 days and 3 nights, we'd discover we're not very well adapted to the planet we live on. We're a bit de-skilled here. We'd either be ill, deceased, or in hospital. All the other animals live here quite happily. And so at age 11, I thought, there is a gap in our explanations. Eric von Daniken had named it, and he'd put forward the idea that there were interventions in our development as a species to upgrade us to an intelligent, conscious, technological species. And as I started drilling down into questions of interpreting ancient texts, I realized that is a story that is hidden in plain sight in ancestral narratives all around the world. It's there in Plato, and I discovered it's actually in the pages of the Bible as well when we drill down into some translation questions.
You know what? When Gavin sent this to me, I said, "Oh my gosh, this is like right up my alley." Before we delve a little deeper, I want to give a huge shout out to Zach Mann. He's a regular supporter of my shows and of the UPR network. And I'll remind people through YouTube, you can support our channel, which helps us bring on new shows, new hosts, and grow a little bigger. We were talking a little bit about that before the show. I do want to remind people we also have new hosts. They were a guest on my show. Actually, they're going to be on next week. the Horsefly Chronicles, Julia and Phil Siracusis, and I welcome them to the UPRN family. But we've got a whole wealth of hosts on here from all over the world. There's something for everybody here. Zachman adds, I got Chariot of the Gods months ago. Still need to read it, he says. So this will be your impetus to give you that little push, Zach, after this conversation. Because while you were talking, and you were talking about the gaps, there's quite a few. Even Joe, our producer who you met, he actually is a big part of ICAR, and I always get this wrong, but I think it's the International Center for Alien Research. And he's been doing a 20-year study on where did the Rh negative factor in our blood come from, because it didn't exist beyond 20,000 years ago, or it wasn't there. It just showed up. Same as the green eye gene and red hair. We all apparently going back into genetics. Love to hear your thoughts on that. But one more thought is, I have studied dolphins since I've been about 6 years old. And we know how intelligent they are. Their brains can actually be bigger than ours. And how do we measure that even that animals they believe don't have a consciousness or a higher higher self, if you will, like just because they're animals? I don't know. I'd love to. I know I asked you a lot and put a lot of stuff out there, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Oh, absolutely. What was the first question? This is middle-aged brain here. What was the first question? Then we'll get on to animals and consciousness.
Got it. I'm even losing my brain here. Well, let's start with the dolphins anyways. It'll come back to, it's been a long day. Like I said, I don't usually I had a big meeting at 2:00. Then that usually have my banner out sooner. So I'm glad I got it out. But I was a guest on a show and I was live before that. So that's why my mouth isn't working.
That's quite all right.
It was, I was talking about I knew it would come to me if I babbled long enough. The Rh negative factor, like where did that?
Yes. All right. So that's a fascinating question. And when I was researching Escaping from Eden, I was really surprised and delighted to find that if you're looking for scientists to corroborate the idea that there may have been ET interventions in our development as a species, if you go to DNA research, that's where you'll find a lot of serious, credible support from eminent peer-reviewed scientists. Right from the get-go, Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of the double helix of DNA, argued that life on Earth has its origins off Earth. He argued for the theory of panspermia, the idea that the genetic coding for biological, conscious, intelligent life has been seeded throughout at least this part of the cosmos, and that whenever it lands on a hospitable planet, i.e. a planet with water, it will generate forms of life similar to ours. And so if I go to Plato as for instance, Plato had gathered together wisdom from all around the world and synthesized it and expressed it and then made logical arguments to support those ideas. And one of the ideas he supported was the idea that life had been developing on Earth, we had been developing, and then some of our neighbors who are a bit further down the track turned up to upgrade our ancestors for higher intelligence and higher consciousness. And you can look through DNA history, you can look through paleobiology, and you can spot evidences of upgrades in our history as a species. There was a very dramatic upgrade 10,000 years ago to do with agriculture. But we know that people of our design and build were here as long ago as 200,000 years ago. Not as intelligent, apparently, as we are today, but nevertheless, they look like us, they live on the planet. And as I read ancestral narratives from around the world, again, there's a suggestion of a number of interventions to upgrade us. And there's even a mystifying story of our being downgraded from a higher consciousness to what we have today. Now, when I read that, and it's there in the Bible, it's there in the Mesoamerican, it's there in the Greek, this story of us being downgraded, what caught my interest about that is that that correlates with scientific study today into a phenomenon called acquired savant syndrome, which, Lorilei, you may know a little bit about.
Well, my son has severe autism. He's not a savant or anything, but even I know they're not quite the same. They used to be very closely equated, but yes, I do know a bit about it, but go on. Yeah,
Yes. Well,
fascinating.
they touch on each other because acquired savant syndrome is what happens when somebody has an accident or an injury to the brain usually,
Mhm.
and the result when they recover is that they have higher cognitive abilities.
Like that movie
Suddenly, they're
phenomenon,
brilliant at maths.
like that movie Phenomenon with John Travolta. Didn't he get struck with lightning? I don't know if you ever seen that movie.
Oh, yes, that
Yeah.
I a long time ago, but that rings bells. And it can be accidents like that. It can be a blow to the head. It can be a near-death experience. But a physical injury to the brain, uh, even a stroke, and suddenly they're brilliant at math. They can speak a language they couldn't speak before. They can play a musical instrument they couldn't speak before. I'll give you an example. Orlando Serrell in the States, when he was 10 years old, was hit in the head with a baseball and was concussed.
Mhm.
Being 10 years old, when he came to, his priority was to finish the game. And he didn't tell his mum what had happened, but he had terrible headaches for a year. And then when the headaches receded, it emerged that he had phenomenal calendar mathematical skills. So
Wow.
that if you say how many Tuesdays between the 5th of April 1955 and the 1st of January 1977, he'll tell you exactly. What were you doing on Wednesday, the 13th of April, 1990? He'll tell you straight away. And these abilities being unlocked by injuries has been studied by Darrell Trefford at Marion University, who's tracked more than 70 of these cases, among others. And these what are they called? I've forgotten the word for brain surgeons. But anyway,
Neurologist
they
or neurosurgeon.
neurologists talk among themselves about this, and they ask the obvious question: how can an injury extend your abilities? It
Mhm.
ought to limit them. And when they discuss it, they say what's happening is that there's a disinhibition of certain brain functions.
Mhm.
And what that means is that we all have phenomenal abilities in our brains which are currently in the off position,
Mhm.
but by accident they can be switched on.
Yes, couldn't agree more.
So if you ask what on earth are we doing with phenomenal skills in the off position, our world mythologies have the answer. And the answer is that we were engineered to a more advanced state, and
Mhm.
then we were dialed down to where we could be more easily managed as
Oh,
a workforce.
I you reading
So
my,
if you,
because when you first said this, Paul, I'm going, we were dialed down, and then I went, oh, now this is going to sound crazy. Joe always, I do a bit of conspiracy. I hate that word. I like truth seeking. He always calls me the conspiracy queen. My partner, Del, has a show called The Delicious Recipe, and he actually does conspiracy or truth seeking. Now, I just listened to a very interesting podcast that has been removed. It came out of nowhere, got removed within 2 days off of YouTube, and they are talking exactly about all this stuff. And they are talking about what the purpose of humanity is. Get a little bit into, if you're into the woo woo or light worker field, I guess, especially you hear more about this ascension to the fifth dimension. They're not so much talking about that. They're talking about what we are capable of human beings as, that we've been led to
yes,
believe that is not possible. And these are some of the things. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I had to add that.
no, that's fine. Well, I reckon you wouldn't find a person anywhere who hasn't had glimpses of telepathic connection,
Oh, absolutely.
glimpses of precognition.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that when you have those glimpses, it raises the question, could I develop this? Could I get better at this?
Mhm.
It's one thing to know who's calling before they call
Mhm.
on the phone. It's one thing to know something's wrong with my mum, I need to call her.
Mhm.
But what if that was our normal state and we could actually, to use the neurologist's language, turn those inhibitors off
Mhm.
so that we have that capability more constantly?
Mhm.
If you read the Mayan story of human origins,
Mhm.
which is contained in the Popol Vuh, now this
Mhm.
was a document that was translated into Spanish in the early 1700s by a Dominican priest in Guatemala.
Mhm.
Now, that document had been buried and hidden for 200 years, because when the Catholic forces went into Central and South America, they rounded up the local priesthoods, executed them, and burned all their texts explaining the universe and where we all came from. Some priests had buried this text in the Quiche language to preserve it and protect it. And then in the 1700s, here was a Dominican priest who was a truth seeker, who they trusted enough with the heritage they had preserved, and said, would you like to know our story of beginnings? He translated it, and the story that emerged told of beings coming to Earth from another planet. It described them as those who engineer, and they arrive at planet Earth after some kind of a cataclysm. It's flooded, shrouded in darkness. They hover over the waters and have conversations about how to rehabilitate the planet. And then at some point, there's this very frank language that's used where the engineers say, let us make avatars for ourselves to do the work for us and bring us our food. And that was us. And so from a primate ancestor, and it's very specific, they had a number of experiments to try and produce us. And the experiments resulted in us, and it says a number of ape-like creatures that live in the forests. So they're hundreds of years ago, they're saying we and apes have a common ancestor, and experiments were done. Well, it says in the experiments, they produced something that wasn't clever enough to serve as a useful workforce. And then they engineered something that was very capable, but had no interest in serving superiors. I mean, if you can imagine engineering a gorilla and then finding that it's not willing to work for you and bring you your food, it was that kind of a mistake they made. Then they produced something that was us plus remote viewing, us plus precognition, us plus telepathy, self-healing. That sort of thing is what's hinted at in the text. And then they realized they couldn't herd us and marshal us about because we were too clever. How do you herd a species that's got precognition? That's not going to work. So they have an emergency meeting, and the chief genetic engineer, Quetzalcoatl, aka Cucumatz, aka Kukulkan, is given the job of dialing us down. And in the Popol Vuh, the Mesoamerican story, it says he produced a vapor which, when sprayed over human populations, damaged their neurological connections to the point where you're now limited to just your 5 physical senses. You can only believe what you can see and what you're told by authority. And they found that helpful. So that's the Mesoamerican story of upgrade, downgrade.
Praying, because that's what I'm feeling, like the world
well
asleep. And I gotta say this, Paul. I've asked this question so many times, and we see it no matter what it is. You get a group of people, doesn't matter where they are, somebody takes a leadership role and everybody follows, and nobody says you need to listen to me, you need to follow me. People just follow, instead of realizing that we are intelligent beings, we are capable of thinking for ourselves. We are all unique individuals. I this is what I teach as a spiritual teacher. We are capable of so much more than we've never been told. I get into this argument off air, but I believe exactly what you're talking about. Everybody has these abilities. I've studied near-death experiences for 40 years, being a psychic or medium. Now, is that something that I just unlocked, or we find some people that it is unlocked? But I think everybody has that ability. They call it their gut. I'm going to trust my gut. I'm going to follow my intuition, whatever they want to call it. We have those abilities. And yet, taught to believe that they don't exist. And I say this too all the time, that what you perceive becomes what you believe and becomes your reality.
Yes, we have been actively taught to disregard the glimpses of those abilities that we have. And if there's someone who has more than glimpses, who's really switched on in these areas, we have been taught through centuries to demonize those people. And there's a really sinister aspect to this, because if you go, for instance, to the court of Queen Elizabeth I, you will find she was developing what became MI5, the Secret Service.
I'm aware.
And from the get-go, and I know you know this, Lorilei, they had a remote viewing department.
Oh, yes.
And from that time to this, intelligence agencies have been working on their remote viewing departments. Now, it was really important at the time of Queen Elizabeth because Britain didn't have the money to get spies in all the courts of our allies and enemies all around the world, but we still wanted to know what they were doing, thinking, planning.
Yeah.
And so if we could just remote view those conversations, it would be really helpful. And so John Dee was developing that department for Queen Elizabeth I.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if a member of the public had been using that modality
Mm-hmm.
at that time, they would have been executed as a witch.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're giving that knowledge to the public.
Mm-hmm.
Do it for the crown and you're allowed to do it. So you've got John Dee.
Today, like, again,
Yeah, same.
Joe, because he'll say to me that, no, the remote viewing program shut down. Yeah, just like Project Mockingbird ended in 1976. It's not over. It's still going on. There's people teaching it. Have you ever heard of Dr. Chuck Kennedy?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so you know he's a friend of mine. I've taken his course because I want to use my gifts to help missing children. He has a 93.7% accuracy with the teams that he's using, and very specific. I love where he's proved even in the brain where we access a lot of these gifts, you can tell the difference between imagination and where he calls it the region of psi. And Joe said, you know, this is what I argue with him. He goes, well, no, all that the U.S. Army could do was see buildings and stuff. No, you're not limited. You can go anywhere with this in the future, back in the past. But most people think this is still to this day very fantastical, something hot Hollywood. You're not capable of it, right?
Yeah, well, if it doesn't take too much digging to find out, no, this is still current for our secret services. There has been some declassification of interest in it from a couple of decades ago, but all that's changed since then is that our agencies have outsourced the remote viewing. Yeah. And it's not difficult to find people who are involved with it today and indeed are allowed to say so. Mm-hmm. So you've had that going for 500 years, but it's one knowledge for the public and another set of information for those who are in the circles of power. So I gave the example of Queen Elizabeth I and John Dee, but if you went to, if I think about Jimmy Carter, President Reagan, they were both card-carrying Christians, evangelical Christians. Mm-hmm. And if you go to a mainstream evangelical church and say, oh, do you have any astrologers here? I'd like to make some decisions. They throw their hands up in horror and say, you can't do that. Christians don't do that. Mm-hmm. That's totally unacceptable. It's rubbish and it doesn't work. And yet those presidents used it.
Or cards, like these are angel cards, okay? And there's somebody I have met that does a live YouTube broadcast every night. And, you know, he was okay maybe with this. He's very religious. But oh no, my mother taught me that those are connection directly to the devil. No, absolutely not. Without even finding out about it or anything.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Well, the scientific study of acquired savant syndrome and the study of world mythologies and my study of the Bible and escaping from Eden says we all have these abilities, and you can use all kinds of tools to nurture those abilities, nurture your, whatever you want to call it, your gut feeling, your intuition. And it doesn't really matter what the tool is. You can use cards, and I know Christians who use cards exactly that way. You can use all kinds of things, but it's not. I think sometimes Christians get anxious because of what they read in the Old Testament, all these grave warnings about involvement in other religious practices. But really, it's about what are the capacities of our brains, our consciousness? Are there tools that are helpful to unlocking that? Right. And that's the awareness I've come to. And after I had done my research for Escaping from Eden, I realized that there are many things that I had thought were supernatural abilities that only Christians had, that actually are abilities all humans have, because we're all spiritual beings, we're all intelligent, we're all conscious. So things like self-healing. So
Yes.
I mentioned in the Popol Vuh, there's a hint that with remote viewing comes an ability for self-healing. Now, I've seen that in the Christian churches. As I say, I was in ministry for 33 years, and I've seen some phenomenal, what you might call supernatural healings, where people lay hands, they send intention, they speak words, they emit love, and then something happens that you would think was impossible. And then as I continued in my journey, I began discovering people who were not religious people, who might not even believe in God, who were able to do exactly the same things, because what we're actually doing is unlocking our human capacities and our capacities as conscious beings. And I have gone back now to the stories of Jesus in the Gospels with a fresh worldview. From everything I've learned from escaping from Eden, learning we're in a populated universe, learning the history of our development as a species, and realize that he's really modeling for anybody. And it doesn't matter what your background, what your religion, if you're religious or not, he's modeling what is possible for a human being with these inhibitors switched off.
Why do you think, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, because with the conspiracy theory, and I don't think it's conspiracy theory, I think that this information is available to everybody, but until you have that light switch turned on, if you will, for somebody to have their attention drawn to a certain area, to start asking why, and that's my question. Why do you think that all of this has been hidden? Because we know this, we know that history has been changed, we know that we have in, and all it takes is I want to say 2 generations. I've read 2 generations, and it's almost like it becomes truth, and whatever really did happen, we never find out. And like, thank God for those priests. It was priests, you said, right? That
Yes.
saved that. And I've heard also, now again, this is alleged, but that there have been certain, how do I say this, actions that they have discovered what is actually really below the Vatican, and it's being removed and returned to a lot of the countries where it was taken from, prices, treasures, texts, you name it. Now, again, I can't prove it, but you even go back to the, like, say, the Library of Alexandria. I mean, look at how much was lost there. Like, why is this happening? Why are they hiding this from us?
Yes. Why are they hiding it? It's a good question. I mean, a recent example of the hiding, I should mention, and is one of the reasons I wrote The Scars of Eden, which is the sequel to Escaping from Eden, is that.
Oh, did we lose you, Paul? We might have lost you. Hopefully you'll be able to get back in. He'll probably message me, guys, on Facebook. I'll keep talking here and see. If not, we just might have a long chit chat about this. This is a discussion right up my alley. So, he's right. I'm dying to hear. So, of course, he left us hanging on the scars of Eden, because I thought that actually Return to Eden was the beginning book, but again, he's put 2 out very quickly. You know what? I'm going to try messaging him and just see if he's still there. Give me just 1 sec, guys, and we'll see. Sorry, I'll just message him. Give me 1 sec. I'm going to say, lost you on the feed. I'm going to say, can you log back in? Sorry, guys, that there's a silence here. Can you log back in? Sorry about that, guys. Anyways, back to the show here. Excuse me just for a minute. Sorry about that, guys. Hopefully our internet doesn't cut out. Apparently there's a thunderstorm. I don't know what's going on maybe with Paul's. I'm just waiting to hear from him. Yeah, that is a really interesting topic about this. And one of my questions is, I hope he can get back in, is who does he think is responsible for this? Now, again, this is just from my research, but what I've been wondering, I've seen this, and when you start to look into this, and actually how I found this was quite by accident. As I was researching the Nephilim, believe it or not. I wanted to find out more about the Nephilim, the alleged, you know, sons and daughters of women, I guess, because with the fallen angels mating with humanity. Apparently, what developed was the Nephilim. And what I came upon was quite a bit of information and research about around the area where the Dead Sea is. And I guess from an area high up aerial view, we're talking from space, it looks like an actual scar where the Dead Sea was. This is where they found a lot of the lost texts, if I understand, like from the Bible and things like this. But it almost looks like a black burn scar. And they've tested radiation levels. They've been quite high in that area. So they're even alleging, they're wondering if maybe we were actually, again, what Paul was talking about, quite an advanced civilization, not through a war, they're wondering, or some type of atomic bomb or anything like that. What caused that? That we're still getting quite high levels of radiation where the Dead Sea is. So it's an interesting perspective. So the other thing I wanted to ask him too, and give you guys some food for thought while you're listening to this, we sort of touched on this a bit, was about, he had said that possibly through his research, he's found out that, they started with, that's why we're so closely related to apes. And if this truly is an extraterrestrial race that came here, that was looking for servants, if you will, and that the ape species didn't work out so well, and then they developed us, that then they sort of dialed us down because we were too adept at many things. What's to say, you know we're saying we're at the top of the food chain, if you will, when it comes to intelligence and consciousness. There's many animal species out there that they've proven to have high intelligence, and we were touching on dolphins, and that's always fascinated me. He said, oh, he's back in the studio. Okay, Paul, if you're in the studio, give me a second, guys. I just have to text Joe and let him know that we'll need him to add our guest back. Just give me 1 sec while I type. Hang on there, Paul. I'm so glad I was babbling. I knew you'd get back here. I'll say, can you please add Paul back? Can you please? I can't do that, unfortunately, because Joe is our producer, so he controls it all. Can you please add my guest back? I'll say he lost it. The feed. We'll say he lost the feed. Sorry, guys. Oh, sorry, but is back. Oops, just turned me crooked while I'm typing. Now, there we go. So hopefully he'll get that, Paul. Just keep talking. So what I was talking about, like I said, is dolphins. They've got such a large brain, highly intelligent. I've read even papers on testing that researchers have done, thinking that they may have a higher intelligence than us. Hi, you're back. I'm just babbling away, waiting for you to come back.
Oh, no, I was enjoying listening to you, Lorilei.
Okay. I'm sorry, I was thinking I can do that. As you can see, I can talk. And then my son came in, the one with the autism, because we're having a thunderstorm. So hopefully I don't get lost. So
all right. All right, I'll pick up where we were, which was wide
on your sequel, and then it cut out.
No worries. I was saying the reason I've written The Scars of Eden, the sequel, is because when I wrote Escaping from Eden, I started hearing from people who came from various backgrounds, but a background that kept recurring was veterans of war. And in particular, people who had gone into Iraq in 2003 as part of that invasion. And they were going in believing that they were there to free the Kurds, or to save the world from weapons of mass destruction, or something along, or to effect regime change. And that's what they believed the assignment was all about. And then when they got there, they found that their unit was not there for any of those reasons. It was there on an archaeological mission.
Yes, I've heard
to
that.
Retrieve items and take them back to the States. Now that, for many of them, was a profoundly disorienting, disturbing, and traumatizing experience, because these men and women are laying their lives on the line, and they think it's life and death, that they're going in to save people. And then it turns out, oh no, this is to keep certain things secret. And the people will be keeping the secrets. We don't even know who they are, but they'll be holding the stuff in America. And so they began, obviously, to cope with something like that, you want to understand it. And so they began researching, what were these things? What's the relevance of them? They discovered it was all connected with the Sumerian stories of beginnings. And that led them to escaping from Eden and to the scars of Eden. And they have conversations with me about those things. The burial of essentially information. Those objects are information, and information to do with who we are and what our so-called prehistory was. So that's a very recent example, 2003, of some of the most important information known to humanity buried. And part of the story that was buried was the question of, were we governed over in the past by leaders who weren't human? And we had the opportunity to dig up the remains of King Gilgamesh. And he is the subject of the oldest narrative known to the world. And that narrative says he was a hybrid between the sky people who governed us and then the human governors and kings who came after. And so if there's any way of DNA testing those remains, or testing in any other way, that would really be the most important archaeological find of history. And yet it was sequestered, buried, hidden. Why, you say? Well, let's go back to Central and South America, because there's a great illustration of why and how it can happen. When the Spanish turned up in Peru, Francisco Jimenez turns up, and he arrives with his letters patent from the King of Spain and the Pope to say he can use whatever force is necessary to subdue that part of South America. And so when they arrive on San Mateo Bay, they're greeted by the locals, Andean people, who turn up and get on their knees to them. And they're thinking, whoa, this is going to be easier than we thought. And so the leader of the local Andean people said to Francisco Jimenez, are you Viracocha? And being a shrewd kind of fellow, instead of giving a direct answer, he said, tell me what you know of Viracocha. The reason they'd asked is they had these legends of Viracocha, a man of medium height with light skin, with white clothes, carrying a book and a staff. Well, that's what these Spanish officers had. White clothing, a staff that could fire bullets, and a holy book they were going to teach. And so there were some interesting similarities, light-skinned. Tell us what you know of Viracocha. And so the locals say, well, Viracocha was the progenitor of our society. Right. He created us. He arrived from the waters. He genocided our ancestors with a flood. And when they said that, oh, yes, genocide, flood. What you call Viracocha, we call God, and we are servants of God. Oh, great, say the Andeans. So in that moment, and you can say it was a little bit of sleight of hand, or maybe a genuine confusion, but by making that confusion, by saying that this being who had genocided their ancestors was God, instantly you've created a society where you've got God at the top, and then the King of Spain and the Pope, and then Francisco Jimenez and the Spanish forces, and then the locals in this pyramid of powers. Is very, very convenient if you then want to take control of the territory. And if the God concept is a violent one, then you can be violent. If Viracocha genocided their ancestors, then you can slaughter their priests. I mean, it was very, very convenient, and they found that it fast-tracked their taking over of what became Peru. So what's happened there is a deliberate confusion of the God concept with memories of ET contact, violent ETs who governed over our ancestors, and the confusion enables the imperial forces to have and hold power in such a way that the people at the bottom of the pile count it as a virtue to serve the Spanish overlords or the Portuguese overlords or the British overlords or the French or the Dutch or whoever it is. So it is really useful to powers of empire if you've got a god who is violent and who has been confused with these ancestral memories. Rome did exactly the same when it took over Christianity in the beginning. And in a way, what the Spanish did in Peru was a systematization of what the Roman Empire had done, 1,000 years before.
Wow. And you know what? It makes so much sense now. But like a lot of this stuff, I haven't researched right back to that history, but it's still going on today. And people still, nobody asks why. That's what and maybe it's just the partner I'm with. I don't know if I would have asked why 10, 15 years ago, but he's always been that way. He'll question everything and ask why. And it's not that I'm modeling him. I'm realizing, why did I never ask why? It was just because you hear people say, well, that's just the way it is. No, it doesn't have to be that way. It
No,
wasn't.
it doesn't. It doesn't. That's right. And this wiring, you mentioned it earlier, Lorilei, how we're all wired to follow. A leader gets appointed, so we all follow the leader sheepishly. We have been hardwired in the way we were engineered to serve so-called superiors. And I've discovered, when I look at the Sumerian stories, the Mesoamerican, Greek, Nordic, Indian, and see that that's part of the story, that we were engineered, in effect, to be a slave species, you realize we've got to be very conscious about decommissioning that wiring. Now, when I go back to the teachings of Jesus and the Apostle Paul, I see very clearly that is what they're doing.
Yes.
We deep down have it in us to believe we need to serve superiors. Makes us very amenable to being managed and manipulated. Jesus said, you have no superiors. You have no superiors. You are all brothers and sisters. You are all peers. Call no one your leader. Call no one your teacher. And that is something that we have struggled through the ages to apply. Even with Jesus teaching that, look at what emerged in his name, a church where you've got people dependent on the pastor subject to the bishop subject to the archdeacon, to the archbishop, the pope. We refeudalize our society very often through religion when you could find teachings from people like Jesus, Buddha, totally wishing to unravel that and getting us operating as a peer society where the whole idea of service is that we serve one another. And the whole idea of love is that we love one another. And Jesus and Paul were very strong on trying to reframe the idea of worshiping God to mean we love each other and we serve each other. And I hope that that's a takeaway that people will have from reading the Scars of Eden, realizing that we've been imprinted with this stratified, feudalized vision, and we need to break it down and get to a place where we love each other, look after each other. And that is an amazingly empowering thing in terms of enabling us to be more who we truly are, more empowered, more conscious, and for a happier human experience.
I couldn't agree with you. I just realized I forgot about the chat. I'm so enthralled here. Besides Zach Mansory, Peter M. Serrano, he must know you. He said, hey, Paul.
Oh, Peter.
Yes. And then he said, always great to listen to you, Paul. So much interesting information. I could not agree more. Like I said, when Gavin sent this to me, I was like, oh, yes, this is right up my alley. So I guess
can I shout out to both those guys, though, because Peter Serrano is one of my greatest encouragers. He's always there in the comments on the Paul Wallis channel, on the Fifth Kind TV, on FB. And Peter, I really want you to know how much I appreciate that. It gives me so much energy to keep going on in my work when you engage with it. And I want to thank you for that. And Gavin, also an amazing man, really courageous man, paranormal researcher. I so admire his courage. His book, Harvest, The True Story of Alien Abduction, I think is the most courageous thing he's written. it's very much at the dark end of the alien abduction spectrum.
Mhm.
But knowing Gavin and having worked with him at John Hunt Publishing, he's been my publicist, has been wonderful. He's given me so much courage and confidence to keep probing and keep researching and keep writing in this area. And the reason I think shows like yours, Lorilei, are so important is that very often when we come to an awareness of these kind of storylines, these kind of realities, it can be very isolating.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be called a conspiracy theorist or any other kind of a nut. And so if you have an experience that doesn't fit, or you make a discovery in your ancient texts that doesn't fit, or you just draw a conclusion that's not in the mainstream, who do you talk to?
Exactly.
And having forums like yours, Lorilei, is so important because it means you can find people to talk with who will reassure you and say, yes, you have seen correctly. Yes, there is something going on there. Yes, there is another story. And as we compare notes, we begin to see the correlations. I've been so amazed to meet people who get to this awareness through a journey in psychic phenomena, others through their own close encounters, others through a study of DNA. You mentioned the RH blood. I mean, that's another rabbit hole you can go down. I study ancient texts and mythologies, and we find that whatever rabbit hole you go down, we all end up in the same rabbit warren, meeting each other and realizing all these things are connected.
Mhm. And the thing is, too, and people don't realize this, but if we don't find out what our true history is, we are destined to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over and over because we never learn from what we did in the past. I have to say that.
Yes.
Hmm.
That's true. And I think that's why many of our mythologies and ancestral narratives have been retained.
Hmm.
So look, when the Popol Vuh says about Quetzalcoatl creating this vapor that sprayed over human populations, I think that's a warning to be alert. What's being sprayed into the atmosphere today, or what's in the environment today? I mean, there's a lot of
Reading
concern
my
about.
mind. You're reading my mind because I was going to ask you that because, you know, when I first started this all started for me, believe it or not. The last house we lived in was severe paranormal activity. I didn't even believe in it's not that I didn't believe in it. I never really, had an interest, and it developed into what I'm doing today. We shared our story on Paranormal Survivors, allowed me to meet incredible people like yourself or Gavin Davies. And again, I want to remind people's last name. We call him Gavin because we know him well.
Yeah,
Um,
GL Davies.
yes, GLD.
Yeah,
That's just it. Just a wonderful, wonderful man. And giving
he
him a
is.
shout out. It's the middle of the night there in Wales over in the UK. But you're right, because it is so isolating and anything that deviates from the norm. And that's why I used to say all aspects of the paranormal. I'm still looking for an all-encompassing word because I talk about these things that you're talking about being downgraded. You know what? And there's a way to get back to it, whether it's through meditation and, even if you go back to science, everything is energy. And people don't
Yes,
how powerful their thoughts, their words, their emotions are. And
yes.
they think it's all hooey. Like when you tell them that, there are many people out there that, especially we've been seeing, especially in the paranormal field, that, say teenagers, especially females that are just starting to go through puberty and you're having those mood swings, they are powerful, never mind with younger energy. But, say they have a major meltdown and a really furious episode, you can move things with kinetic energy like that. People don't realize all this stuff. So how does, are we just, like you said, getting a glimpse of switching on one of those abilities?
Yes, that's exactly right. And that's where I got to at the end of Escaping from Eden. I'd started looking in the text of Genesis and saying, hang on, there's another story hidden here. Let's do some translation work. And then the Sumerian story emerges. That's the beginning. But by the end of the book, I'm on the territory you just mentioned of asking, what are we capable of?
Ooh,
And not just, not
thoughts.
just in terms of, wouldn't it be nice,
Mhm.
to have better self-healing? Wouldn't it be nice to do more remote viewing, have better telepathic connection, etc.? But not just for the sake of having superpowers,
Mhm.
but for the sake of how do we live on this planet as
Mhm.
a species? If we could live more intelligently, more consciously, surely that would create a better shaped society and a better shaped future. And so I hope that when people read Escaping from Eden and the Scars of Eden, the biggest thing that will happen for them is a real upsurge of courage to begin exploring what they're capable of and following up on, should we say, anomalies in their own story or glimpses of higher powers that they've had, and really pressing into those things.
Mhm. So, some of the abilities you said you looked at, before I go there, I was going to ask you what are some of the ones you've discovered for our listeners. But
Yeah.
I was just
I'll,
add one thing, Paul. The only thing that's concerning is the fact that there's always whoever you want to call that's pulling the strings. I'm sure you probably know as well as I do, but to not upset the YouTube balance, my thing is when you have somebody that's exceptionally gifted, there's always the powers that be that want to manipulate and take that person for their own. If you want to look at Minority Report, it's almost like I think that it's always put out there in some way or another, predictive programming, but
yes, yes.
there's the ability for them to take these people. So how do we get en masse for everybody to unlock these abilities? And what have you discovered some of the abilities that we have the potential to unlock?
We're in a really interesting moment in history at the moment, I think,
I
because there are periods where people who have this sort of forbidden knowledge, John Dee type knowledge, where their role is to bury that knowledge
mm-hmm.
and to hide it and keep it protected for another generation. And so that's the story of the Gnostic Gospels buried in the Nag Hammadi desert
Mm-hmm.
so that they wouldn't be destroyed by a militarized Christian orthodoxy, or the Popol Vuh that had been buried and hidden for 200 years so that the Catholic forces wouldn't destroy that. So there are periods where there's a burial of knowledge. And then you mentioned predictive programming, but another side of it is that that secret knowledge often gets leaked back
Mm-hmm.
into novels, movies, stories, so that that knowledge is being leaked back into the public realm that way. And often secret societies play that role. And,
Mm-hmm.
you go to Star Trek, Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, The Jungle Book, Planet of the Apes. I mean, you could go 2001: A Space Odyssey. You've got the work of some secret societies there who've leaked a bit of information that's found its way into a story, which is why a lot of people, when they read the ancient texts, say, hang on, I recognize this,
I've
because
heard
it has been in
before.
novels.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has been in movies.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that leakage of the knowledge back. And at the moment, there is some disclosure being permitted. And certainly at the ET end of the story,
Mm-hmm.
ET contact and even paleo contact, our ancestors' contact with ETs, there is more being permitted. There's more of a drip disclosure happening now than has ever happened in my lifetime. So now is a time for people to be pooling their knowledge and talking about it and getting it into the mainstream. And I think the more we can do that, the more chances are that we will join the dots with regard to human potential as well, and realize, hang on, there's a bigger story we're part of here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hopeful that there's an opportunity right now for us to have a lot more conversation and to find out what we're capable of. But there was a really curious lead in to me writing Escaping from Eden. And at the time, I didn't realize it was connected at all. Looking back, I now know it was connected. And that was that I was enjoying a period after a very tough work assignment that had been quite demanding for a couple of years. And I felt I just needed to take a pause and breathe a bit before jumping into the next thing. And part of my breathing involved spending more time getting the sun on my skin, spending more time in nature, deep breathing, barefoot walking, grounding, that's right. And I just thought of that in terms of physical recovery, psychological recovery. I now realize that was the prelude to some rapid learning and reframing that was about to happen. I was going to get a download of information, but
my mind.
I needed I needed to recalibrate first. So when I started talking about escaping from Eden, even last year, beginning of last year, I talked more about my research journey, joining the dots. But now I realize there's this other layer of being able to wake up, think more creatively. And it came from this recalibration. And something happened on one of my bushwalks that I now realize really was connected. And I know many of your listeners, Lorilei, will get what this is about, and it might seem totally disconnected to others, but I'll tell you the story. I was out for one of these bushwalks in the Yarra Ranges in Victoria, beautiful part of the world, and barefoot walking and sunning, and I was feeling good. I was feeling more human again. And as I was walking by the riverside, I realized there was a little animal walking towards me. And it was an echidna, which is the Australian version of a porcupine. Yes. It's an egg-laying porcupine. And beautiful little animal walked right up to me and stopped at my foot and looked up at me. I thought, what? This is amazing. And it spent quite some time just around my foot looking up at me. And it didn't move until I decided I wanted to carry on my walk. And I thought, well, that's beautiful. That's never happened before. And then further down the track, I needed to make a call of nature. And as I was attending to that, a little mountain pygmy possum hopped up to my foot and looked up at me. Now, it's a beautiful animal. It's a protected species. They're super cute. And it was just looking at me. I was thinking, wow, I'm having a really great day today. The next, it was two swamp wallabies hopped up to the path. Yeah. They stayed really, really close as I walked by, and they're very shy animals. That's very unusual. And I thought, oh, gosh, I must be really calm today. I must be really in tune with nature for this to be happening. I wonder what I'll see next. And when I asked that question, immediately in my mind, the picture of a 5-foot-long goanna flashed into my mind. As soon as I'd seen it in my mind, I said to myself, oh, Paul, don't be ridiculous. We don't have goannas that size in this part of Australia. They don't live here. They live up in the hot country, up in the Northern Territory. They don't live here. 5 minutes later, what was on the path in front of me but a 5-foot-long goanna? So that was a little bit of remote viewing, a little bit of precognition, or I was feeling its field or something. But I knew that my consciousness was in a different place to previously. So I went home pondering on that. Round about that time, we had to move and we had to prepare the house for sale. So I needed to get a painter to come and paint the exterior. And I was talking to the real estate agent about this. And she said, oh, my husband Keith does house painting. I could ask him to come and quote you if you'd be happy with that. And as she said that, the image of a man flashed in my mind, very precise photographic image, so precise that when I saw him drive down the street a couple of weeks later, I recognized him from what I'd seen in my mind's eye. At the same time, a guy phoned me up wanting a gig at my church. He was a musician, and I knew exactly what he looked like from talking to him on the phone. And again, when he walked in the room randomly a couple of weeks later, I recognized him from what I'd seen in my mind's eye. So these experiences made me think there's some kind of resetting happening here, which I'm enjoying, but I also could see it didn't fit in my ministry viewpoint where God gives you information so you can do ministry. This I could tell was something else because it had nothing to do with ministry. This was like waking up. This was like another bit of my brain switching on. And I now realize that was the prelude to being able to think all the fresh thoughts I would have to think and be able to get to the conclusions I needed to reach and be able to understand the text I was going to read to produce Escaping from Eden and The Scars of Eden. So now I look back, I look at how I rediscovered Plato. And when I started reading Plato, I started thinking, oh, I'm cleverer than I thought. I can understand this. And now I think, no, actually, I don't think I can take credit for that. There was something else happening that was helping me and that was enabling me to process all this information that I couldn't have done on my own.
Well, you know what? You said some important words here. It was so funny when you said download. I didn't mean to speak over you, but I was literally thinking that word when you said it. And I believe in downloads. I really, really do. And again, how do I get what I get from, I call it spirit, but whatever. And again, I'm going to be really honest with you, and I evolve constantly. I say I will never know the answers, just like most of us. Research or hard facts, yes. But for example, I would never have entertained this a couple of years ago. But the reason the show is called the Angel Rock, because I believe I work with the archangelic realm and higher beings, could be ET as well. I love crystals and I love rock music. So I just embrace who I am. But you know what? I can't say beyond a shadow of a doubt that what I'm working with isn't something benevolent in ET. But I do know, and we do all have this gift. It's that inner voice. And the way I explain it, because when this
Yes,
started for me, I would say, when am I going to hear my guides? What's their name? Blah, blah, blah. They don't care about names, as I've understood. It's energy on that side. They just agree because that's something that we use as human
yeah,
beings. But
definitely.
when I tell people how you can hear whatever you want that source to be, like maybe it is ET, I don't know. It's benevolent and it's loving for one thing, but you're laying awake at night and you got a big problem and you're mulling it over in your mind, you're mulling it over in your mind, you don't know what you're going to do. All of a sudden it's in your voice. It's not you're not
Yeah,
hearing voices, but it's the voice of reason. It's the voice that it's the exact thing that
yeah,
you needed that will solve that
that's
problem.
right.
It comes from there for you with this amazing story that you told. I keep hearing that that was almost the final piece. You had it all. Like you were living in the now. It was your energy, like you said, but with the grounding, the getting out in nature. And it was almost because I believe that animals live in the now. I really don't believe that they harbor any ill
Yes.
will whatsoever. There's a lady by the name of Anna Breitenbach. She's from South Africa. She's an animal communicator. I don't know if you've ever seen her work. It's incredible. There's a documentary on her proving that she actually does communicate with animals. She doesn't speak.
Yes,
Hmm.
I saved a link
Hmm.
the other day because I want to watch her work. I
Watch it
absolutely,
because
absolutely
talks
believe in
about
that.
what you just said, how this started for her. She was in finance in the US and she kept feeling this calling to take a tracking course. So she did with somebody that's Native American. And she was really good at it. She didn't realize this, but she talks about this in her work and she interviews different people from different tribes, some very, very primitive, but they all talk about this ability 300 years ago where we could just touch the footprint of the animal. And it was like the animal knew. We'd almost made this agreement that yes, this would be our food. They honored the animal, but the
Yes,
a vision of what this animal is, sort of like what you're talking about with people, and they'd be able to track it just by its energy, or they'd know. And like there could be a whole herd, and the person would say, no, that's not the animal that we need to. It would appear to them in their mind's eye, and I think that's almost what happened with those animals with you. It sounds like that's beyond. I don't believe there's any coincidences, anyways. But to have
oh,
that
I agree.
animals, go ahead.
I was going to say, if anyone has doubts that we are telepathic
Hmm.
beings and that we can enhance that, just talk to someone who has a pet and ask how they communicate with their pet
Hmm.
and how their pet communicates with them.
Hmm.
Ask anyone with a newborn baby, how do you communicate to each other?
Hmm.
And you realize telepathy is our start point.
Hmm.
Even as we are in our current modern distracted form, it's our start point. If you begin paying attention to that and nurturing that, you realize that we are in a very interesting relationship with all the other animals that live on planet Earth. Bearing in mind, if I can put it this way, it's not accurate, but that we were animals once.
Oh, I agree. Mm-hmm.
You know, that we have a memory of our animal life before all the upgrades.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why children have this sense that we should all be friends with the animals. We should be able to talk to the animals, why we have cuddly toys, why we fill Facebook with videos of animal friends, you know, ducks and dogs and pigs and cats playing together, or we sense that this is how it should be because we remember a time when we were in harmony with the animals that way. And I absolutely believe you can nurture that with animals. I was talking to somebody just yesterday who's involved in psychiatric healing therapy using horses.
Oh, yeah.
And what he said to me, it's his wife who does this work, was that it's not just that you bring someone who's got a psychiatric problem, a mental health problem, alongside a horse, and the horse will be able to connect with them in a way that's healing. It goes far beyond that.
It does.
He said the horses know what their job is in that moment. That's what you begin to realize, that there's some kind of, if I can put it this way, an agreement between horses and humans, that this is part of their role with us, not just for us to ride on them, not just for them to pull our vehicles, but for them to heal us, and they know how to do it.
I just called my dog, by the way, with my mind, believe it or not. You never see me say a word, did you? Look at her.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
that's wonderful.
The horses, we did it's a therapeutic riding program here. I agree with you 100%. My youngest son was nonverbal and a lot of behavior issues as a small child, but we get on that horse and there would be peace. There would be no anxiety, none. The animal wouldn't know. Like I swear to you, well, I don't have to swear to you, and you know this, you understand it, but for our listeners, would know. There would be no untoward behavior. Like I said, it was almost like they were symbiotic, if you will. And it was
Yes.
such a beautiful thing to see. Both my sons actually communicate with animals. I'm still learning, but my that's how I knew both my boys had abilities, because my oldest would say to me, "Oh, the dog wants this, or the cat's thinking this," or and you and I realized, and he can, the both of them can do it. But what
Yeah.
I'm saying is they're not exceptional. That's not what I'm saying. We can all do this. I think it's almost like you said, turning on that light switch, or
Yeah.
remembering and unlocking it. But I think you have the key with what you were talking about with that
Yeah.
spiritual walk.
And paying attention to it.
Thank you. Yes, paying
attention to it. At that time of recalibration, I had, this is kind of a funny and a horrible version of the lovely thing you were just saying, where I tuned into the bush that way, and then one day we were driving our car out of our driveway, and there was this huge spider on the car, and I said, "Okay, stop! Everybody, get out of the car." So we all got out. There's the spider. I thought, I'm going to have to deal with this. And unfortunately, the spider might not survive me dealing with it. And as I was battling with it, it could see me and was responding to my movements. And I realized our consciousness was touching.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. Okay.
And it was a horrible, horrible, freaky feeling.
Ooh.
Because it knew I probably wanted to kill it. And I'm sorry to upset some of your viewers who'll be horrified at the idea of killing an animal, but that was the only way I could think of dealing with this creature. And there was this mutual fear and loathing and enmity, and we realized we're in this death dance, and it was the most horrible experience I've ever had with another animal, because there was a meeting of consciousness. It was very strange. I would encourage anyone, for a more positive illustration, if you've got a cat or a dog, you will be communicating with that telepathically all the time. I would just ask you to think about what is happening if you're not getting information from your pet through body language that you understand, then how is their mind communicating to your mind? Just think that through, and it will begin to expand your whole notion of where our mind stops. Does it stop at my skull? Does it stop here? Where does my consciousness stop? Where does my field stop? And you begin to realize your field is much larger. So I've had other more positive experiences where birds have come wanting food, and their presence is enormous. They're not just a small animal. I can feel their presence here because I'm paying attention to it. For instance, I had an amazing experience. We're slightly off topic, but it's just a funny experience while we're talking about this with my cat. I have a cat, Hugo, beautiful Russian blue cat.
Oh, beautiful.
And he's a real thinker. You can tell he's a thinker. And like most cat owners, I spend a lot of time wondering what he's thinking.
Yes.
But he went through a period where 4 o'clock every morning, he'd climb up into bed between me and my wife, Ruth, and he would snuggle up against me. And I was half asleep one morning when he did this, and there was an exchange of thoughts. And this thought came, do you do this with Sky, our white kitten? And I said, no, Hugo, only you.
Yeah.
So you don't snuggle with Sky like this? No, Hugo, only you. Yeah. And after we'd had that conversation, he sort of shook himself a bit and walked off. And it's only when I properly woke up the next morning that I thought, was that a real conversation?
Did I dream that?
Was that because that didn't seem to be something I would think up. It wasn't a dream, and it wasn't like a cute conversation, sweet meow and then me speaking. It was a much more aggressive feel to it. Such as an alpha cat might have. And I actually think, yes, there was an exchange of thought there. Cats are very concerned who's at the top, who's here, who's here, who's here. It's the kind of conversation he would have. And as I say, when you start asking, how does the communication happen? How does the horse know what its job is? How does it communicate with the person who needs its help? How does the dog pick up you've got this need? How does the dog know you've got cancer here? That's why it's sniffing. How do you know the cat needs this food, not that food? So on and so on. How do you know your baby needs a change? You start paying attention to that, and you realize that we are conscious beings who are far bigger than our bodies, and who are bigger, therefore, than this material existence and material life. And I think that is an awareness that not only gives you greater curiosity, which is the great gift of being human, it gives you far greater courage for living this life and exploring its potential.
I listened to this podcast or something. It had come up after this video I was talking to you about that came up, and I don't know what the name of this channel is or what it just showed up in a news article. And it was so funny you were talking about remote viewing, because this person was actually talking about you don't win wars with fighting, you win wars with spies. So he was talking about what you could see and what have you. But what came up afterwards, and I've never listened to him, but I never question what shows up in my field, especially if it shows up more than once, because I know it's meant to pay attention to this. And he was talking about all kinds of things about the power of your mind and, being able to shape your reality. He actually gave the listener an experiment to try for 30 days. And nowadays it's the woo-woo word of mindfulness, but really talking down on a level. And some people have that real gift where anybody could listen to them. They were interesting, fascinating, but also able to, not using huge words or anything, but really drew you in. And I think it was an older type of presentation. It was audio, because he kept talking about the man, the man, but he meant humanity.
Yes.
And
yes.
He was talking about the power of your mind and how you shape your reality and this existence that we live in. And that's, I don't understand how people don't ask why again, because you think about it, everything on this planet Somebody thought of and created. Don't get me wrong, the planet was created by a bigger force and everything else. But then we get
Mm.
back to your book again. You know, did we create it, or like who do you think, this is why I went about this whole question this way, but who do you think created us? Like, because, you know, or when we get this inspiration, where we're all these gifts, like who created us in the beginning, do you think? Like, gave us all this ability
Yeah.
and downgraded us? What are your thoughts?
Well, I've been really thrilled to rediscover Plato in my research for Escaping from Eden and the Scars of Eden. He's a real linchpin figure. And I found it very interesting that he had a God concept that he was very confident of. And he also taught the things I'm talking about to do with ET interventions in our development. But our very beginning, he saw in God. And what he meant by the word God is, it's actually expressed really well by the Apostle Paul in a sermon he gave to a Greek audience when he said, by God, I mean the source of the cosmos and everything in it.
Mm-hmm.
So they both believed that the material cosmos is emanating, not did emanate, but is emanating from a point of consciousness, and that in the beginning was consciousness, and that the material universe has come into existence in order for that consciousness to express itself and experience itself.
Yeah.
So when I talk about panspermia, you know, the genetic coding for biological, conscious, intelligent life being seeded through the cosmos, that's
Right.
really a nuts and bolts way of talking about consciousness becoming material. It's really the same thing. And now we have quantum research
Right.
that is beginning to point to the creative role of consciousness.
Yes.
That consciousness organizes the material universe. These are the hints we're getting. I don't want to overstate it. These are the hints we're getting. Plato said that's absolutely where it begins, that our existence, and it's only logical, he does all this step by step through logic, that all consciousness emanates from the source consciousness,
Right.
which means that we as conscious beings begin as aspects of the cosmic consciousness.
Okay.
Then we individuate, then we have this apparently individual material experience, and then after this, we go on to some other relationship with the cosmic consciousness. Now, after I read that from Plato, I realized that's the same storyline that Jesus gives of himself, particularly in the Gospel of John, where it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So there you've got that cosmic unity. Then the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Now as a human being wrestling with the issues of this life, this material existence. And then at the end of the Gospel, Jesus is praying, speaking to the source, who he addresses as Father. And he says, Father, now I'm going to return to you back to the glory we enjoyed before the foundation of the world. Now, I believe that's all our journey. And so as conscious beings, our origins are in the cosmic consciousness. We're now having a material experience as individuals to wrestle with the question of, can we do consciousness and harmony as individual entities exercising free choice? Can we do it? That's the big question. We're wrestling with it. Our ET neighbors are wrestling with it. The planet's wrestling with it. The solar system, the cosmos. We're all here. And we're also, because we're material beings, we're having to deal with something that doesn't bother us before we're material beings. And that is the fear of non-existence. The moment you have a physical body, there'll come a moment where you don't have it anymore, where it doesn't work. And we all live with this fear that we might stop existing. And it's part of our animal experience. And it's part of what shapes how we address the question of, can we love one another? Can we do consciousness and harmony as a society? But I think that's the big story. It's like the hero's journey on a cosmic scale, that we've come from unity, we've come from consciousness and intelligence, and now we're having this experience. And can we do it? And I love that perspective because, again, I think it gives us more courage to live this life and to try and address this question. You and I are making discoveries on behalf of the universe. on behalf of God, on behalf of the source. We are all part of the experiment. And it's a very different framework to the religious framework that has God up here, us separate, him giving orders, him pulling the strings, and it's about obedience, disobedience, punishment, consequences, heaven, hell, all that sort of thing. No, we're actually all here on a learning journey to learn on our own, each other's behalf, on behalf of the cosmos. And can we enjoy it while we're doing it? And that perspective, I think, takes some pressure off. We sometimes, I think, have a more anxious experience than we need to,
Absolutely.
as if we might get so many things wrong that we might spoil our chance, that as if life is a tightrope and we might fall off it. Whereas in fact, we are here on a great journey of discovery and exploration, what it means to have a human experience.
Mhm.
And I find that more empowering and more exciting. And I
I
think it's truer.
I have to agree with you, but I believe we have countless, we don't stop. I just seen the most incredible picture by co-host for tomorrow night. We do a show called Tripping the Void. Seraphine Hurley, she sent me, and it's a video, and it's of one of those life helicopters in the US, I believe, that was, they fly emergency critically ill patients from, say, a smaller hospital or an accident scene to the hospital they need to go to. And for some reason, I don't know if it was on a security camera or what, they're caught on the security camera. Patient we didn't see get loaded into the helicopter. As they start to take off, you see this beautiful light emanate and float right up. That person passed away right at that moment when it happened.
Oh, yes. Oh, that is so powerful. That is so powerful. And experiences of light, balls of light, flashes of light around conception, birth, death. Oh, listen to a few of those stories. And again, your sense of
I
mystery and
did both.
excitement at who we are.
I worked in both. I always say I've hurt my back, so I'm not able to go back to nursing, but I always say I've been so deeply, deeply blessed to be there at the beginning of life, working in the NICU and labor and delivery. And then when I worked in the community, a large portion of my work was palliative care. And the things that we see as nurses, I'm actually writing 3 books. What are they all intertwined? They're not related. One is about autism and our journey, because I always say unless it's in your bubble or your field, you don't turn your attention. But 1 in 35 years ago, it was 1 in 10,000 boys diagnosed, and depending on where you live geographically, on average it's about 1 in 43 boys, and girls get affected as well. They're theorizing in 10 years it'll be 1 in every second child. So I
Oh,
am writing that book. The second one is our paranormal experience, all from a perspective by telling our story to be able to help others who may be experiencing something similar. The third book, and I'm collecting the stories right now, is mostly with registered nurses, but also with first responders. That the incredible, beautiful, miraculous things we see as what we're talking about once we shed the human body and what you see as somebody passes from this lifetime onto, I call it going back home. Because
yes.
you know what? Near death experiences, again, studying them for 40 years, and you are absolutely right. When somebody comes back, they no longer have a fear of death. They have gifts unlocked that they never knew they had before. Why and how is that happening? Right?
Well, Lorilei, this is something I am sure you will be very aware of
Mhm,
through working with people as they pass. I have discovered, and I touch on this in the Scars of Eden,
mhm,
that at the beginning of Christianity, there was this kaleidoscope of theologies and this kaleidoscope of knowledge. And it all got narrowed down to this narrow orthodoxy. And along with the knowledge of our ET origins, there were other aspects of early Christianity that got disemphasized and shut down.
mhm.
And two I want to name are this. And one is the fact that we have ancestors around us helping us.
Absolutely.
It's there in the book of Hebrews. It talks about us being surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, people who have gone before us, who are very interested in our lives and how we're going.
Mhm.
And the writer of Hebrews, we're not sure who the writer was, but the writer uses this phrase, surrounded, not preceded by our ancestors, we're surrounded by
Yeah.
them.
And
And they are involved and aiding us. And there's another strand as well, which comes in 1 John.
Mhm.
It's a little verse that says, it says, don't believe all the spirits who communicate with you, do test them. And so there, in a flash, you've got an idea of channeling of spirits,
Absolutely.
who, some of whom it says are there to help.
Yeah.
So here you've got a world where you've got ancestors helping you, spirits helping you,
Yes.
both can help, both can communicate, and that got shut down and excluded, but it was all part of the mainstream of very early Christianity. And as I did my research into paleo contact and ET narratives, I realized all those things had got bunched together and had been secreted away in texts that were now on the, what's it called, the Librorum Prohibitorium, books Catholics can't read, or books no one can read because they're buried in the Nag Hammadi desert.
Mm-hmm.
And all these aspects of knowledge really do go together to show us we are in a far more interesting cosmos than the one we generally get taught about.
The Asian culture, though, right? They have the altar to the ancestors, and they
They
deeply
do.
revere and honor their ancestors. So this is some of the things that we're, gosh, I'm gonna have you. We're not done yet, but I'm gonna have you back on, Paul, because I could talk to you for hours about this stuff, because this is what I teach about. This is what I speak about, and it's, again, I realize everybody's on their own journey, and there has to be some type of impetus for somebody to wake up or have their attention or bubble, like I said, turned in that direction to start looking. Because once you do, and then there's so many people, because of the programming that they've received. There's a reason why TV obviously is called programming, right? But they either think it's science fiction or it doesn't exist, instead of, maybe taking a look at it because you're hearing about it, or like books like yours, or, there's
Yeah.
humanity, I believe, is starting to wake up, but very slowly. And I've been dying to ask you this. I swear to God, you are so intuitive, because things I've been thinking, you just start to say. I have to ask you, where do you think we are going with humanity? Because it's very concerning. We have to be careful about the words we
Mm.
use on here. But
Mm.
if what's being pushed in the way of this injection that's coming, and they're talking about AI or transhumanism or changing, you know, have you heard anything or come across anything, even in the past, that's been talked about in this way, what you believe where we're going with this, or?
Yes, I think it's very concerning, and I mentioned before about that the Mayan story of us
Yeah,
being downgraded.
yeah, savant, or
The spraying of the vapor. I remember in the 1970s when journalists were pursuing scientific research that was exposing what leaded fuel was doing to us. That the fumes from leaded fuel was brain damaging our children, making them less intelligent and more aggressive. And that science was finally proven, and it's why we now drive vehicles with unleaded fuel. And
yes,
I think we've got stories like that of the Popol Vuh really warning us to
yes,
pay very close attention to what is being put into our environment or into our bodies,
hmm,
and to be very alert
hmm,
to the way negative agendas can be pushed
hmm,
forward. And it might be pushed forward by um, authorities that we can't see. We can see our elected governments, but they're not necessarily the top power. In a world
yeah,
where corporations are stronger than countries, straight away the picture's more muddy than that. And even through the recent health crisis, we're beginning to become aware that corporations, organizations, have a huge role to play, and some of these organizations are not public, they're not visible. So there are lots of warnings that we're given about this. And I must say, it's very easy to become alarmed and discouraged in the current environment.
Mhm.
I find some cause for hope, though, in what emerges from our ancient texts about the company that we have, the ET
That's why I
demographic.
asked you. I knew you'd have a beautiful answer.
ET demographics and interdimensional beings as well, who have a stakeholding in Project Earth. Now, last year we heard from Hayem Ashed,
Mhm.
the former Israeli chief of space security,
Right.
saying that there is an intergalactic federation
Yep.
that we're in contact with that has chosen not to self-disclose. And I'm really grateful for him for saying that and for using that kind of language and doing it so publicly, because if you use the language intergalactic federation, you immediately have to ask, well, who are the different demographics? How do they differ? What do they want? What is their stakeholding?
Mhm.
And what he's saying echoes what our ancestors told us, that there is a spectrum of beings interested in us. Archonic beings, energy-based beings, interdimensional beings, extraterrestrial beings, and they are all bumping up against each other with conflicting ideas about what they want from Project Earth and what humanity's place is in the picture. And really, I think my hope is less that our political leaders are going to suddenly get it together and start managing for, you know, the common good. I am more hopeful that there are some on the council who are on our side, as I
Yes.
believe there are. And when I read our ancestral narratives and hear stories of people who came particularly from the Pleiades to help our ancestors
I
through
knew
moments
that.
of planetary crisis,
Mhm.
or Lyrans who have a role in our origins as a species, or people from Sirius who came and gave tuition to some of our ancestors.
Mhm.
I believe they're still in the picture. I believe they're still here. And I am hopeful that with their advancement and their goodwill towards the human race,
Right.
we have some footing to get through whatever the coming crises are. I believe there are others who are more interested in the planet than they are in human beings, and some who may positively hate human beings.
Yes.
There's a whole spectrum, but the fact that there are some around us on the planet up there who love us, who are concerned about us, who think we're a wonderful species, who have unique things that maybe even they don't have. I would love to see greater disclosure happening so that we can make more intelligent diplomacy, so that we've got allies that we're working with. Now, that might be happening at a covert level. I'd
Right.
just love to be more aware of that, and for us all to realize we've got company that we can do business with in a positive way.
I couldn't agree with you more. Every name you've mentioned, I was because I was going to ask you that. Then we got off on it, or I think I did ask you, who do you think's involved, and with the beginning of us. But sorry, my brain's slowing down on me here. But the thing is that I love the answer you gave me about the cosmic consciousness and what have you. But I was when I was asking that question, I was actually referring to the races. But every race that you've named, and I believe there are many more as well. And I also agree that there are some that have no use for humanity. As I understand it,
Yeah,
there
yeah,
are not as many that hate us, I guess I'll use that word, than the numerous races that really do love and care for us. All I keep hearing, because I do channel as well, is we are a young race. We are a young race.
yes,
A long time
yes, I
ways,
believe that.
but they look very lovingly on us, almost like, and not in a derogatory way, but like the way you would love a child. Like they realize
Yes.
we have some growing and some growing up to do, right?
Well, that's what I hear when I listen to ancestral narratives from Native American peoples and from Aboriginal Australians.
Mm-hmm.
When they talk about Pleiadian involvement in
Yes.
our ancestral times, is very positive, and it is that kind of feeling that they were involved in our beginnings,
Mm-hmm.
that they love us, that they want to see us develop.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, I do think there's something unique about us that makes us very attractive to our neighbors. There's something unique about the fusion of animal, mammal, earthling, and the ET aspect that's made a unique cocktail in Homo
And
sapiens. And so
emotion,
there's,
I've heard. Not that they don't have emotion, but it's almost like the rawness and range. I've heard that before with certain races, not all of them, but the real
yes,
right, because we're almost, and even that with my work, talking about shadow work, we have the potential to be it all. We may look at a serial killer and with disdain, or even what disdain, sorry, or what you were talking about in the way of heaven and hell and justice and punishment. And that doesn't exist on the other side. That drives people bonkers if they hear that. But we have
yes,
the potential to be that serial killer. We have the potential to do all that evil that we turn, oh, we don't want to be like them. We have the potential for it all. And I agree with you. We very much can be very animalistic. So I have to agree with
exactly. Exactly. And
you.
I was really surprised as I was doing my research in the Bible
Mhm.
to find that there are these references to these particular demographics. And when there's a verse in the book of Job, which some scholars believe to be the oldest book in the Hebrew canon, we're not
Mhm.
quite sure where it came from. We think it was an Arabic book originally that
Interesting.
migrated its way into the Hebrew canon. And there's a curious verse in there that talks about the power exercised over us by the Pleiades, Sirius, and Orion.
Wow.
And ancestral narratives all around the world mention those three regions of space. So we've got a star system, which is Sirius. We've got a constellation, which is the Pleiades and Orion. They're all talked about as if they exercise power over us. And of
Mhm.
the three, Orion seems to be the most
Yes.
worrying.
Yes, I agree.
And the other two positive.
Because
And then in other sources, I've heard of the connection with Lyrans and Pleiadians.
yeah.
And so just probing our world mythologies, you begin to realize we've got regions of space being identified, different agendas being identified, and different issues around the contact.
Hmm.
And so I unfold a little bit of that in the Scars of Eden in a way that asks, what's the imprint that's been left by these different contacts? And then what choices can we make as a human race?
I love it.
We've been given different programming, to put it in nuts and bolts terms. Different interventions at different times taught us how to farm. And the two different models of farming are in conflict right now on planet Earth. So you've got industrial scale petrochemical GM farming versus traditional rotational
Hmm.
organic farming.
Hmm.
They're in conflict. And that battle was set up tens of thousands of years ago by the input of different cultures who came here. Right now, as a human species, we can make a choice.
Yes.
How do we want to farm our planet? Do we think this is sustainable or this is sustainable? Do we think this is good for our bodies or this is good? We need to live as a sovereign species as best we can and make choices like that and not just keep repeating the same old
Hmm.
that was set up for us tens of thousands of years ago by people whose planet this isn't.
I hear you know what? We are almost out of time. I hope you'll come back again. I just
I'd
love
love to.
to you, Paul. I could talk to you for hours. This is as soon as, like I said, Gavin sent me this, I said yes, because I think he sent it to me earlier and then it got lost in my email. And then I happened to find it. So I apologize. It took so long to have you on because I went through this and I said, yes, 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 this is right up my alley. So where can people find you? Like, and about your books, like when's the,
Sure.
and I apologize because he sent me the Return to Eden. He didn't mention maybe
Escaping from Eden.
or
Yeah.
Escape from Eden, sorry. He sent me that and then he didn't mention about the sequel. So please tell people all about that. And
Sure thing. Well, this is great. It's worked out fine, Lorilei, because I can mention two books. So,
yes,
Escaping from Eden. Escaping from Eden was the first book on this theme. It's a real gateway book you can give to anyone on all the topics we've been discussing. And then the sequel, The Scars from Eden, goes a bit deeper, goes further around the world, listens to more ancestral narratives, and looks at the implications a little bit further. You can get Escaping from Eden and The Scars of Eden on Amazon, Kindle, Barnes and Noble, wherever books are sold. Go there. You can pre-order The Scars of Eden. It will be released at the end of this month. Escaping from Eden is already available. You can find me on YouTube at the Paul Wallis channel. That's Wallis, Wallis, or the Fifth Kind TV on YouTube. We also have a website, fifthkind.tv. And you can follow everything I'm into on my website, which is Paul Anthony Wallis, Anthony with an H, Wallis, Wallis, paulanthonywallis.com.
I love it. I have your website, I believe, on the banner as well. I want
Great.
to thank you so much for being here. I want to thank everybody that's listening. Wait, we got a comment I want to read before I leave. Oh, Zach Man, he says, well, I'm heading off to bed for the night. Thank you, Paul, for joining us tonight. Always a pleasure to see you. Have a good night, everybody, and see you all tomorrow night. And the reason why he mentions that, segueing into it, excuse me, I will be back with my partner in crime, as I call her, PIC, and bestie, Seraphine Hurley, with Tripping the Void. I don't know what we're going to be talking. I think we may be talking about teleportation. I'm not sure. We didn't decide on our topic, but we go all around the world and back again. That'll be back on from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Central Standard Time here on UPRN. Also, if you want to get a hold of me, you can reach me either under my name on my Facebook profile, Lorilei Potvin, or better yet, just get a hold of me on facebook.com/The Angel Rock. I have two groups on there, Paranormal University for all things paranormal, and then the Angel Rocker Tribe for many of the topics that we have discussed tonight. Paul, you are wonderful, amazing. I cannot wait to have you back. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Lorilei. It's been a real pleasure, and I'll look forward to the next time.
Me too. Take care. Good luck with your move.
Thank you very much. I'm broadcasting from a garage here today because we're in the middle of a reno.
Well, thank you very, very much. And I send to everybody listening, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, so much love and light. Thank you. And we'll see you tomorrow night. We're still live. We're just waiting for Joe. Thank you again, Paul, for being here. What a pleasure.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed talking with you.
So did
It's
I.
amazing, just amazing how all these topics join up, isn't it?
It is. Well, normally my brain's not this scattered. Like I said, I went from being live in the paranormal chat. Then it was a guest on a good friend of mine. She's an amazing numerologist. She's on Blog Talk Radio. So I did, that's why I have my cards out. I don't need cards, but it's fast when people are calling in to do psychic readings, right? And then they pop back over here.
Yeah.
So I've been all over the place today. So I think I might have to text Joe to remind him, because we'll know we're done. Or if you see the little arrow moving in the background, and he's there messing around on the computer. Let me text him and I'll tell him, Joe, we're all done. Hang on. Yeah, he's still not here yet. I'll put we're all done. I forgot to tell you that we usually end about 5 minutes before the hour, just because it gives Joe time to switch over to the next show and everything.
Okay.
Doesn't want to text here. I'm trying to text him. Text. There we go. It says it's delivered. So, what's the weather like there, Paul?
Oh, it's a beautiful day today. Sunny, warm, not too warm. You can go out for a walk, which we'll do a little bit later. It's been a lovely Easter weekend. You're
in fall, entering into fall, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. We're on that side of the planet.
Yeah, well, we're kind of in spring. Our snow is gone. Oh, we still got all kinds of chat here, so we'll see what's going on. That's Joe. So he's there. We're all done. Oh, he goes, he put bloody great day here. Sunny, pretty.
So nice.
Smart Alec in the chat. We're all done, Joe. If you're playing on the computer, you can hear us. So